From a network of highly secure, top secret locations across North America, this is the Spurs Insider Podcast, first one of 2022. I am your host, Mike Finger, joined by Express News sports editor Nick Talbot, beat writer Jeff McDonald, and the travel-weary Tom Orsborn, who we all hope, we can only hope, does not have sugar in his coffee this morning. Tom, what is the update there?
I can't break the habit. I'm continuing with the sugar, even though it spilled the end of my laptop when I spilled some coffee on it. I
Tom, our valiant.
I learned something. It's better to drink black coffee if you're going to spill it on your laptop.
Yeah. Somehow Tom weathered on through adversity of this long East Coast road trip that the local Cagers just completed. Tom was there for all of it, sort of. He had to skip a trip to Toronto because of travel/COVID protocol complications. And then you get to Boston and lose the laptop, but somehow he made it through. I'm not sure that the Spurs fared as well as the beat writer did. Everything sort of hit them at once too. The last time we spoke on this podcast, you could kind of put two and two together and expect that just because the outbreak had not hit them yet didn't mean it wasn't going to happen, and it did. And they were kind of a shell of themselves as expected, and only won one game on that road trip. Tom, you were there for most of it. What were your general impressions?
Yeah, it's kind of like what didn't happen. Beginning with on the eve of the Memphis game. It was December 30th, night of December 30th. The news breaks that Becky Hammon's taking the WNBA job. Then she tells the team the next morning about the news. They lose 6 players to COVID. 3 starters, 2 more key rotation players. Primo goes home to Toronto to have a homecoming game in front of an empty arena. Primo becomes a starter. They beat Boston. Great game, just a great game, great atmosphere there. DeJounte came back in that game off of protocols, and he's had an incredible run since for a guy that missed 5 games. They played twice in overtime. It's just so much went on, but like you said, at the end of it, they were 1-6 and don't have much to show for it. They played well in certain games. Like I said, that Boston game for me, it was the most entertaining game of the season. But it's just it was a wild trip.
I think what we're learning is the Spurs are going to have trouble winning games with like 5 rotation players out. Like they're not necessarily a team that's going to weather that storm on a nightly basis very well, because it was hard enough when they have everybody in place. But it's sort of like 2 years in a row. The COVID bug, literal COVID bug, hits them right when they're starting to do some stuff. Last year was kind of the same way. They had won a few in a row. They seemed to be kind of gelling, and here comes like all the players and protocols, and then you come back.
One could argue it's 3 seasons in a row.
Good point. But this season you come back from the previous road trip where that combined with some other good work. They had won 10 of 15 games and were kind of playing as well as they played all season. Then you lose DeJounte for the start of this trip, and then the whole snowball effect starts rolling downhill after that. And I don't want to put myself on the same level as Tony Fauci, but I do think the last time we convened on this podcast in 2021, I predicted that that 7-game East Coast trip was going to be trouble as far as COVID goes, because I'm a genius and no one else could have seen that coming. But I did say that out loud, and sure enough, it was one guy after another, and most of those guys are still in protocols as we speak.
I'm no Tony Fauci either, but I don't think they got it on the East Coast. I think it started at the beginning of this, and I think this is kind of a silly argument as to where they got it.
You're right. You are not Tony Fauci.
Okay. Okay. We're talking about a team that just went 1-6 on the road, a team that has now I guess, probably since we did our last podcast, jumped into the play-in situation and now has fallen back out of it. This is a rebuilding year. Greg Popovich has acknowledged as much from the beginning. So it can be kind of silly to paint the all rose-colored glasses photo of what's going on, but there were some interesting things that happened as Tom mentioned, on this road trip where so much went wrong. And to start out with the guy who probably got the biggest opportunity as a result of this, Joshua Primo. What do you think, Tom, of how he acquitted himself early on in his run as a starter, which probably will not last very long and might end up back in the G League before long?
Solid. That's the best way to describe it. He was solid. He had his moment, in the Brooklyn game, sending it to overtime, sinking a three on a nice kick out pass from Lonnie. Drew a great charge against Harden late in that game. He's kind of Derek White Jr. in terms of drawing charges. But yeah, he was solid, not spectacular, but he acquitted himself well on both ends. And I asked Pop, I was thinking, has this stint as a starter maybe changed the thinking of sending him back to Austin once they get healthy? And Pop reiterated that, yeah, he's headed back to the G League for more seasoning, more minutes. But he, like I said, he acquitted himself well.
I thought that the Brooklyn game was great for him, not because he was great the whole day, but because he struggled so much early and stuck with it. And Tom, you and I both talked about that with him after that game and some of the lessons that he learned playing against, James Harden and Kevin. There were key plays down the stretch where he ends up guarding either James Harden or Kevin Durant. And I don't think either one of them scored on him in those plays. And like you mentioned, he hits the big 3-point shot after I think he was 3 for 15 before that. Yeah. Ends up making the open three that wound up forcing overtime. And, did he make a few mistakes down the stretch? Sure. But I guess if we wanted to get into this age-old G League question again, it's probably worth talking about whether more games like that game was on Sunday morning, more games like Sunday where he's sort of overwhelmed, but then has the chance to work through it. Does that do him more good than going back to Austin and developing the sort of team leader parts of his game? I think there's more than one way to look at it, but I guess what I'm saying here is it's probably worth it for him to have had an experience like that against Brooklyn, which he told us, he said he'll probably remember this forever. And maybe that can complement some of the stuff that happens in Austin. But I sort of enjoy watching the youngsters have to figure it out in a game like that.
He's going to tear it up when he gets back to the G League. That's what I think. I think that's what's in the future. As soon as this COVID outbreak subsides among the Spurs, he'll be back in Austin there's not that much G League season left. Right. It ends in February. So next month. So I assume he goes back to Austin. He's going to tear that place up for a little while, and then he'll be back. I guess the thing about having a chance to play and make mistakes and figure it out for a young player, that's good. But if the Spurs are at full strength, does he really have that chance?
That's the question.
The Spurs are at full strength, and he goes out there and screws it up. Does he have a chance to figure it out, or is he just out of the game? And Derek White's playing more, or something like that. Like you said, there's two ways to look at it, and I don't really care. Whatever they do with him, there's benefits, there's pros and cons. He's going to be fine. I don't think we're going to look back in 10 years and go, Josh Primo would have been a Hall of Famer, except he was in the G League for a couple of games in 2022. I don't think it's going to make a difference one way or another. From an entertainment standpoint, it is kind of fun to watch different guys play sometime.
I thought it was sort of fascinating to and maybe you guys recognized this earlier, but how much point guard there is to his game. And I'm not sure what he ends up as position wise in the league, but even though he was starting alongside DeJounte the past few games, there's just plays, there's moments where you think that maybe he's a point guard. I mean, maybe that's what he's going to play. And I think they have said they expect him to grow more, and if he's 6'4" now, he's already a big guard type, but he's a playmaker. And he, over and over again, Jeff has mentioned this, Tom has mentioned this, he recognizes the right pass. And that can be in the half court. That can be when he tries to push the tempo a little bit when maybe the defense isn't expecting him to. I think there's really good, and this isn't groundbreaking, but there's really good basketball instincts there. That was, I think the Spurs were encouraged by.
Yeah, and I think he's come a long way in that regard. You know, we haven't seen a whole lot of him at the NBA level playing on the ball. Did a lot of that in the G League. His one season at Alabama, I remember talking to his college coach at Alabama, who is a fellow called Nate Oates, and you know he said, because if you look at Primo's numbers as a freshman at Alabama, it doesn't really scream lottery pick, which is true for a lot of guys. But you know, he said Primo was at his best at his one college season as a catch and shoot guy. And we tried to put him on the ball some and just give him that experience and have him learn that. And he had to work through it, and he wasn't as good in those situations. And then we moved him back off the ball for a while just to be a catch and shoot guy. He was good again. So that really wasn't his bag in college, which was just last year. So the fact that we're seeing that from him in this limited exposure at the NBA level really, to me, speaks to the leaps and bounds that he's made in that regard, and maybe his coachability, his teachability, his ability to adapt and learn new things. And I think if you want to make a case for why the G League has been good for him, I think that's one thing you could mention, is he was able to go down to the Austin Spurs and play almost exclusively on the ball and learn a little bit more of that position. And you're seeing him being a lot more comfortable with it at the NBA level. And I think it also goes back to, like we mentioned earlier, I think he just has a very high basketball IQ to begin with. Always seeing that right pass to make. I kind of mentioned that at some point during this trip on Twitter, that, you know, his obvious NBA skill right now is the catching and shooting, but he's always making the right pass, and it doesn't necessarily result in an assist or a basket, but it's always, sometimes it's a hockey assist, sometimes it's the right pass and the guy flubs the layup, whatever. But if you watch him a lot, you start to recognize that he always knows where the ball should be at all times.
That's a good point. There were a number of passes in the games he started where he hit guys, he hit them in the right spot and they just couldn't convert. So his assist totals, would have been a lot higher. But yeah, he has, as Pop said, it's an innate ability. He understands the game and spacing and just the passing dynamics so well.
And he's 19. Like, he's 19.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I keep coming back to. He's got so much further to go in basically every regard. So there's a lot to like there and a lot to be excited about. I don't know many Spurs fans that are killing that pick anymore. I know back in the summer, you'd hear from a lot of Spurs fans that couldn't believe they took this. Who's this Josh Primo? Who from where? 12th overall. I don't hear that as much anymore. And it's not like he's just set the NBA on fire, which is also kind of funny to me too. He's come in when he's had to come in and been solid, but I think he's won over the fan base.
That's kind of the cycle of NBA fandom. I think everywhere is, you always embrace the new thing eventually. There's always reason for hope. This isn't the same thing, but exactly. But the one funny thing about watching the Knicks at Madison Square Garden is how crazy those fans there, and it's happened before, like insanity happened there. It was a new thing, and it was just the best thing ever. When RJ Barrett gets the ball anytime and in any quarter, like against the Spurs the other night, like the place goes, they're expecting him to do great things because he's the new fad. Meanwhile, they're just booing the hell out of Julius Randle, who was last season's sensation. They boo Randle at every opportunity. It's just kind of flavor of the month type of stuff.
Yeah.
And I
the
think
way they
that
turned on him, it's just so severe.
It is. And, I think that the Knicks and New York fans are an exaggerated version of that. But I think every fan base in just about every sport kind of goes through this next guy is the savior. We might not have liked it when they signed him or drafted him or whatever, but now he's great. And the guy we liked last year is done and we don't want to see him anymore. And the Randall thing was just amazing. And I know he probably was a bit overrated in terms of what he did last year, but they just do not like him anymore and love RJ Barrett. That'll probably change the next time we go to MSG and hear people talking about how I'm standing here, which is the best place in America to say that. Before our next podcast, we probably should talk about people who might not be with the local Cagers anymore. I mean, your Jalen Morris's, your Tyler Johnsons, who else have they signed? Devontae Kaycock up from the G League, who actually is playing pretty well.
Andrew Lamb.
It's been quite something to see these guys kind of settle in. And I think the Tom, you can talk about this, but the players seem to like them. Pop has learned their names for the time being. He says he didn't know them necessarily pregame some nights, but they're kind of doing what they're around to do with their 10-day hardship deals and holding down the fort.
Yeah. Kaycock, there's a physical presence about him. He hits the board so strong. And I was thinking, he's just in the wrong era. In the 70s, he would have a lifetime job as an enforcer type. Back in that day,
he might be one who, to be clear, he's around for the season probably. He's on a 2-way deal. Whereas the other 3 guys we mentioned were on the 10 days. So, I mean, they like Kaycock. I don't think he's a huge part of the future, but we might see more of him down the road. Tyler Johnson is probably not long for silver and black, but as Pop said, Tyler is Tyler, and who can disagree with that?
It's such an interesting deal that's going on with these hardship players. Tyler Johnson had a 10-day stint with the Sixers. And then he makes his Spurs debut against the Sixers. And Doc Rivers said that, he would have loved to have kept him for the rest of the year. But it was a numbers game with guys coming back, and they had to let him go. But there's guys that are coming back that they're excited to, as Tyler Johnson said, pull on that uniform one more time, and maybe they get that one more shot. But it's an interesting thing that's come out of this, COVID outbreak that the league has, that has hit the league so hard. So, but he'll be gone, and the other guys too. But Kaycock certainly has made an impression. So it's just interesting what's come out of the hardship cases.
You know how you can tell you have like a riveting, award-winning podcast when the host is like, "Hey, why don't we talk about Andrew Lamb now?"
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's also a sign that you have a riveting podcast when the people who aren't contributing anything themselves criticize people who are trying to move the conversation along. That's always cool. The guy who's been staying at home for the past 2 weeks.
I don't know if you know this, but we're in the middle of a pandemic. I'm trying to do my part.
So if you want us to win an award, what do you want to talk about? What's going to steer this into the Emmy category of the podcast? Go ahead.
I'll save Jeff here, although he doesn't need saving by
You shouldn't. Don't save Jeff. He can snipe from the back row, but he's not going to contribute anything on his own. This is just like, go ahead, save him.
Interesting thing is the guys coming back from protocols, as we mentioned earlier, DeJounte Murray, I mean, he picked up not where he left off, but he picked up even better. And
hey, Tom, he's 25 years old.
Yeah, exactly.
Tom, he told Tom and I don't know how old you are, but I'm 25 years old and I'm in good shape and I don't
I
need
think
to be sitting down.
You should have made him guess. You
Yeah.
should. That would have been
Tom told
fun.
him.
Oh, he told him. Okay.
Tom told him.
I would have loved to hear what a 25-year-old how old they think you people are.
But Lonnie too, who he has a template for a book or blog on how to stay in shape without leaving your hotel room. He came back strong and aggressive. So, McDermott, White, Keldon Johnson, Trey Jones, whoever else is out there coming back, maybe that's something to look at, is how strong those guys come back. Because in a way, if you're asymptomatic and you've got this time off, your legs, you're coming back fresher and stronger.
I'm going to guess that Lonnie Walker's hotel routine is not the same as mine. I like to eat like a ton of snacks from the concierge lounge and watch Netflix. That's probably not what Lonnie Walker did.
Lonnie said he was doing back and forth suicides from one wall to the next. Suicides that were what I guess the Spurs stay in really nice Four Seasons types.
Yeah.
So he might have a little more room to work around.
Not like the Super 8, like the rest of us.
Push-ups. DeJounte is a good topic, though, Tom. You did a really good job there because he's worth more discussion, not only because of how well he's played coming back, but just kind of how he's involved over the whole season as the clear-cut, without a doubt, leader of this team in just about every way. Thinking back a few months to the preseason, it's almost funny to think that we were even questioning who would take over for this team, who would be the leader on the court, who would be the leader off the court. It's been fairly obvious from the beginning that it's been DeJounte Murray. Whether that turns into an all-star invitation this season, that might not happen because of the Spurs record, because of just how many guards there are in the West. But he's really playing at an elite level in a lot of different ways, on defense, on offense, and in terms of being a passer, a scorer, a clutch shooter. And if nothing else, the Spurs have learned this season that they do have a legitimate guy that can be a difference maker in this league, and that's probably success number one for this team in this rebuilding year.
But before we get into all that, I seem to remember reading some content along those lines recently. Do you want to tell people where they can find that content and other content like it?
Oh, I assume that you're talking about expressnews.com or the hard copy edition of the San Antonio Express News.
What's the hard copy edition? Is that like a printed out blog and they put it on your doorstep?
It is like a printed out blog that's delivered by actual humans to brick and mortar houses.
That sounds amazing.
It's pretty amazing. It's retro. Also, you can get the links to all this stuff in the Spurs Nation newsletter at expressnews.com. But yes, there's coverage of DeJounte Murray's emergence as a team leader. As Jakob Pertl mentioned the other day, he's a guy, when I asked people to describe DeJounte Murray's leadership style, the type of thing that the Spurs have had a lot of different styles over the years, dating back to you could go back to George Gervin, but David Robinson and Tim Duncan and Tony Parker and Monty Ginobili, Kawhi Leonard, even in a way, they all had very different styles. Jakob quickly pointed out that DeJounte Murray does not shy away from confrontation, and he will be tough on you and he will get on you. And the Spurs like that. And he's a tough love guy. And he might actually be this year, now that we have feel good puppies and rainbows, Greg Popovich, who is always looking at the bright side of things. Like DeJounte Murray might be the tough cop with this team these days. But he's embracing that. And the guys like him, as Tom just mentioned earlier, when he came back from that week and a half, 2 week layoff from COVID, he was even better than he was before. I think he probably wants to be an all-star. Who wouldn't want to be an all-star? But I think he's also serious when he talks about, he cares about that far less than getting respect for the Spurs. He wants this rebuilding thing to work, and he's a key part of it.
He sure does look like a 2 to 3 time all-star. Just pointing that out now. But I think he's a lot closer than we would have guessed. When I was saying that a couple months ago, and if he keeps this up, he's only 2 or 3 COVID protocol outbreaks away from being an all-star. And the only reason he probably isn't is because of the glut of guards in the West that just get it on either pedigree or the fact that they're, they deserve it. Just because there are so many guards with Steph Curry, Luka, Dame, there's such a good guard play in the West. Chris Paul, analytically, he's outplaying even a couple of those guys. You look at all the advanced stats, and he's technically been better than Dame this year, which is ridiculous to say, but Dame got off to a really slow start. So that's not really true. If you want to look at like who might come down on the tie breaks, he's had a better season than SGA from Oklahoma City, if you look at records wise. But the glut of guards there is probably going to, leave him at home unless there's a couple injuries or some COVID outbreaks.
Yeah. And it's just hard. It's hard to make an all-star team 10 games below 500. I mean, it happens, but it's definitely a demerit.
That's why, Nick mentioned it from earlier this season when it's still to this day, DeJounte hasn't made one yet. And I think the discussion was, are there 2 guys who will make 2 all-star teams on this list, on this roster? It's still probably, it's not a slam dunk, but I'd probably take no over yes, just because it's really hard to make one. And to think of 2 guys who could make 2 off this roster, that's asking a lot. You could be a really good player like DeJounte is this year and maybe not get in. But I think it would be cool for him to get to go, just because he generally does raise his level of play to the competition. He loves playing against like LeBron James. He loves that Pop gave him the option of not playing in Madison Square Garden, and of course he was going to do that. Like he thrives on those types of stages, and I think it'd be cool for him to go. But I guess the reason why I am leaning a bit pessimistic on it is because, it's like Jeff said, on a team that is 10 games below 500, it's hard to get in. And I think he has bigger goals than that anyway.
Yeah, that's like, and as I was saying, analytically, he's been better than a couple of those guys, but even Devin Booker, he's almost on every analytic level. He's been better, but the Suns are who they are and the Spurs are who they are. And if you get choosing between 2 of those guys, it's going to be Devin Booker every single time.
And Chris Paul. I mean, the All-Star game is an exhibition game for fans to see the popular players that they want to see. It's not necessarily an analytical exposition. So that might be unfair in a way, but I mean, that's the point of the game, is to entertain people. And Spurs fans would be highly entertained by DeJounte Murray, and he absolutely deserves consideration, but I don't think it's the hugest outrage in the world for the best players on the best teams to get in. Is basically the point.
Yeah, and those reserve spots are filled by the coaches who always tend to lean towards winning teams. And it was like that worked on the Spurs' favor for a long time. Not that he didn't deserve it, but Tim Duncan was getting in years where he was averaging 13 points or something, because the reserve coaches wanted to reward, the Spurs for winning 60 games or whatever.
Manu, as great as he was, never had the best statistical case for inclusion. He didn't make it that often, but when you win, good things happen for you. And the Spurs, I think, as we wind this first podcast of 2022 down, I think that's probably a lesson that we can sort of conclude on is expect good things to happen when you make good things happen. And are you trying to interject before I close this?
Well, I was going to say, speaking of winners, we should give a little nod to Jock Landale. He was a big winner on the road trip, proposing in the very romantic winter wonderland setting of Central Park and getting a yes, a little bit of a delayed yes, as Mike detailed in his column, but that was kind of neat.
I found it quite amusing when Jock Landale was describing this extravagant proposal to his longtime girlfriend from Australia in Central Park when Jock Landale looked out at Tom Osborne, your humble host here, and Taylor Hare from the San Antonio Spurs, and he looked at three of us and said, "I'm sure all of you know everything that goes into a proposal like that." When only one of those people understood it, but I was glad that Jock gave us that kind of credit. Jock is making good things happen for himself. He had a solid road trip. The Spurs can just hope that they can keep making good things happen for them, and maybe they will get the accolades that come along with that. That is something for us all to think about as we take care of each other and keep it real.